At the meeting to divide my late wife's assets, my son-in-law told me to leave. This matter is only for family. I simply opened the window and gave a signal for the show to begin. He collapsed when he saw who walked through the door. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Stanley and I'm 64 years old. 3 weeks ago, I buried my wife, Leah, after 42 years of marriage. Today, I'm sitting in a law office listening to my son-in-law tell me I don't belong at my own wife's estate meeting. This matter is only for family, Skylar announces, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority he's perfected over the past 3 years since marrying my daughter. He's standing near the mahogany conference table like he owns the place, his expensive suit catching the harsh, fluorescent light that makes everyone look pale and tired. The leather chairs in Attorney Morrison's office creak as people shift uncomfortably. My daughter sits beside her husband, her eyes fixed on the stack of papers in front of her. She won't look at me. That hurts more than anything Skylar could say. I'm sorry, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding, I say, keeping my voice steady even though my hands are trembling slightly. The smell of old law books and fresh coffee fills the room, mixing with the faint scent of Skylar's cologne, something expensive and overwhelming that Leah always said gave her headaches. Skylar turns to face me fully, and I see something in his eyes that makes my stomach clench. It's not just dismissal or irritation, it's satisfaction. He's enjoying this. Stanley, I understand this is difficult, he says, and his voice drips with false sympathy. But the documents we're discussing today involve decisions that Leah made regarding her estate. These are private family matters that require input from her immediate survivors. I was married to her for over 4 decades, I managed to say. The words feel like they're being pulled from somewhere deep in my chest. I think that makes me immediate family. Attorney Morrison clears his throat uncomfortably. He's been the family lawyer for 15 years, handled everything from Leah's will to our property transfers. His usually confident demeanor seems shaken today. Mr. Holloway, Morrison begins carefully, perhaps we should review the documents first and then determine the appropriate parties for this discussion. But Skylar raises his hand like he's stopping traffic. Jim, we've already discussed this. The primary beneficiaries need to make certain decisions about the property distribution. Stanley's input, while appreciated, isn't necessary for the legal proceedings. The words hit me like a physical blow. Primary beneficiaries. As if I'm some distant relative who showed up hoping for a handout. I look at my daughter again, silently begging her to speak up to defend me, to remember that I'm her father and that woman we're discussing was my wife. She finally meets my eyes, and what I see there breaks something inside me. There's guilt, yes, but underneath it is something worse. Resignation. She's already made her choice. Dad, she says softly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. Maybe it would be better if we handled the initial paperwork ourselves. We can discuss everything with you later. The room falls silent except for the sound of papers rustling and the distant noise of traffic outside. I'm aware of every detail suddenly. The way the afternoon light slants through the blinds, creating stripes across the conference table, the tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner, the uncomfortable pressure of my tie around my neck. Skylar is watching me with that same satisfied expression, waiting to see if I'll fight or surrender. My daughter is staring at her hands, her wedding ring catching the light. Attorney Morrison is organizing papers with unnecessary precision, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. I think about Leah lying in that hospital bed just 6 weeks ago, her hand barely strong enough to squeeze mine, whispering about how worried she was about our daughter's future. I think about the conversations we had in those final days, her voice growing weaker but her concern for our family never wavering. I think about the folder hidden in my study at home, filled with documents that would change everything happening in this room right now. But mostly I think about how Leah always said that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment to act. I stand up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting in the uncomfortable chair for the past hour. Every eye in the room follows my movement. Skylar's expression shifts slightly, as if he's surprised I'm giving up so easily. "You're absolutely right," I say, and my voice sounds calmer than I feel. "This is a family matter." I walk toward the large window that overlooks the parking lot. The law office is on the third floor of a downtown building, and from here I can see the courthouse across the street, the small park where Leah and I used to eat lunch when we had business in this part of town, the bus stop where elderly people wait with their shopping bags and tired expressions. I can also see the black sedan parked directly across from the building's entrance and the two men in dark suits sitting inside it, checking their watches. I turn back to the room and catch Skylar's eye. For just a moment, I let him see something in my expression that makes his confident smirk falter. "Before I go," I say, walking back toward the table, "I want to make sure we're all clear about what we're doing here." Attorney Morrison looks up from his papers, his brow furrowed with concern. "Stanley, if you have questions about the estate planning documents, we can certainly schedule a separate meeting to—" "Oh, I don't have questions about the documents," I interrupt gently. "I'm quite familiar with what Leah actually wanted versus what these papers claim she wanted." The temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. Skylar's face has gone very still, and I can see a muscle working in his jaw. "What exactly are you implying?" he asks, and for the first time today, his voice has lost some of its polished control. I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out my phone, checking the time. 2:15 in the afternoon. Perfect. "I'm not implying anything," I say. "I'm simply stating that there are some discrepancies between what my wife told me about her wishes and what these legal documents suggest." My daughter finally looks up, and I can see confusion mixing with the guilt in her eyes. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I walk back to the window and glance down at the street. The black sedan is still there, and now I can see a third man approaching the building's entrance. He's wearing a badge clipped to his belt, and he's moving with the purposeful stride of someone who has a job to do. "Skylar," I say, still looking out the window, "before we proceed with any of these estate decisions, I think there are some things you need to explain to everyone in this room." "I don't know what you're talking about," he says, but his voice has gotten tight, controlled in a way that tells me he's fighting to maintain his composure. I turn away from the window and raise my hand, giving a small, deliberate wave toward the street below. The silence that follows is so complete I can hear my own heartbeat. Attorney Morrison is looking between Skylar and me with growing alarm. My daughter's eyes are wide, moving from her husband to her father like she's watching a tennis match she doesn't understand. Skylar follows my gaze to the window, and I watch his face change as he processes what he sees. The color drains from his cheeks, and his hands, which had been resting confidently on the back of his chair, begin to tremble slightly. "What did you do?" he whispers, and for the first time since I've known him, Skylar sounds like exactly what he is, a frightened man who realizes his time has run out. The sound of heavy footsteps echoes from the hallway outside, growing closer with each passing second. Multiple sets of footsteps moving with the deliberate pace of people who know exactly where they're going and what they're there to do. I look at my daughter, and my heart breaks a little more at the confusion and fear in her eyes. She has no idea what's about to happen. She has no idea what the man she married has been doing to our family, but she's about to find out. "The only family matter we need to discuss," I say quietly, "is why my wife died terrified of her own son-in-law and what he did to force her to change her will while she was too weak to fight back." The footsteps stop right outside the door. 3 months before, Leah died. I found her crying in our bedroom at 2 in the morning. Not the quiet tears of someone processing grief about her diagnosis. Those I had seen many times during her battle with cancer. This was different. This was the desperate, frightened sobbing of someone who felt trapped. When I asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and said she was worried about our daughter's future. At the time, I assumed she meant the natural concerns any dying mother would have about leaving her child behind. I held her close, stroked her graying hair that had grown back in soft tufts after her final round of chemotherapy, and promised her that everything would be okay. I had no idea that her tears were about something much more immediate and terrifying than death itself. The first real sign that something was wrong came 2 weeks later. I was paying bills at the kitchen table, something I'd always handled because Leah said numbers gave her headaches, when I noticed a withdrawal from our savings account. $8,000 taken out in a single transaction. The notation said, "Family Emergency Fund Transfer." I stared at the bank statement for a long time, trying to remember any emergency that would require that kind of money. Leah's medical bills were covered by insurance. Our daughter had never asked us for financial help. In fact, she'd always been proud of her independence, something that apparently changed after she married Skylar. When I asked Leah about it over dinner, her reaction was telling. She dropped her fork, and her hand went immediately to her throat, a nervous gesture she only made when she was deeply upset. "Oh, that," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I gave it to them for some unexpected expenses. House repairs, I think." But I knew my wife after 41 years of marriage. I knew when she was lying, and I knew when she was afraid. The way she wouldn't look at me, the way her voice got higher when she was trying to sound casual. These were all signals I'd learned to read decades ago. I didn't push the subject that night because she was already so weak, so fragile. The cancer was taking everything from her piece by piece, and I couldn't bear to add more stress to her daily struggle just to breathe, just to keep food down, just to make it through another day. That was my first mistake. I chose to protect her feelings instead of protecting her from what I was beginning to suspect was happening. The second withdrawal appeared 3 weeks later, $12,000 this time, with the same vague notation about family assistance. When I brought it up, Leah's reaction was even more extreme. She started crying immediately, but when I tried to comfort her, she pulled away. "Stanley, please," she whispered, her voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." Those words should have been a warning bell, loud enough to wake the dead. Instead, I convinced myself that she was just emotional about her diagnosis, that the medications were affecting her judgment, that she wanted to help our daughter prepare financially for life without her mother. I told myself a lot of comfortable lies that fall, while my wife was being systematically terrorized in her own home. The third withdrawal was $15,000, and this time I didn't ask Leah about it directly. Instead, I decided to call our daughter myself. If there was a genuine family emergency, I wanted to help however I could. "Dad, I appreciate you checking," she said when I reached her at work. "But everything's fine. We're just doing some home improvements. Skylar's been handling all the financial planning." Skylar's been handling it. That phrase stuck with me long after I hung up the phone. Our daughter had always managed her own money with careful precision. She'd been balancing checkbooks since she was 12 years old, saved every penny from her first job to buy her own car. The idea that she would hand over financial decisions to anyone, even her husband, seemed completely out of character. That night, I sat in my study after Leah had gone to sleep, staring at the bank statements spread across my desk. $27,000 in 3 months, all of it supposedly voluntary gifts to help our daughter with expenses that she claimed she didn't need. Something was very wrong. I started paying attention to things I had previously ignored. The way Skylar's voice changed when he talked to Leah, softer, more intimate, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. The way our daughter had started deferring to him in conversations, even about subjects where she clearly knew more than he did. The way Leah would tense up whenever his name was mentioned. Most disturbing of all was the way Leah had started asking me strange questions about our financial assets. How much was the house worth? Did I have the paperwork for her life insurance policy? Where did we keep the documentation for our investment accounts? When I asked why she needed to know, she said she wanted to make sure everything was properly organized for after she was gone. It seemed like a reasonable explanation. People facing terminal illness often want to tie up loose ends, make sure their surviving spouse won't have to deal with complicated paperwork during grief. But something about her urgency felt wrong. She wasn't asking these questions during quiet, reflective moments when we were talking about her legacy or memories she wanted to preserve. She was asking them after phone calls with our daughter or after visits from Skylar, when she seemed agitated and distracted. The worst moment came in early December. I had driven to the pharmacy to pick up her pain medication, a trip that had become routine as her condition worsened, and when I returned home, I heard voices from the living room. Skylar was there, sitting across from Leah on our couch, and he was speaking in a tone I had never heard him use before. Not the charming, solicitous voice he used in public, not even the casual familiarity of a son-in-law talking to his wife's mother. This was something else entirely. "I'm not asking you to lie about anything," he was saying as I stood frozen in the hallway listening. "I'm simply explaining what needs to happen to protect everyone's interests, including Stanley's." "I don't understand why it has to be so complicated," Leah replied, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Why can't we just leave everything the way we planned?" "Because circumstances change. Your medical bills alone have put a significant strain on your assets. If we don't restructure things properly, Stanley could end up losing everything to healthcare debt. Is that really what you want?" I set down the pharmacy bag as quietly as possible and moved closer to the doorway, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid they might hear it. "But the house is paid off," Leah said. "We don't have healthcare debt. The insurance doesn't cover everything," Skylar interrupted, and his voice had gotten sharper. "There are gaps, complications you don't understand. Trust me, I've researched this extensively. The legal structure I'm proposing will protect both you and Stanley." There was a long pause, and then Leah spoke in a voice so small and defeated, it made my chest ache. "What exactly do you need me to sign?" That was the moment I knew my wife wasn't making voluntary gifts to help our daughter. She was being manipulated, possibly threatened by the man our daughter had chosen to marry. The man she trusted, the man she loved, the man who was supposed to protect and care for her, was systematically stealing from us while my wife was dying. I should have walked into that room immediately. I should have confronted Skylar, called his bluff, demanded to see whatever documentation he was claiming justified this theft. I should have protected my wife the way she had protected our family for 4 decades. Instead, I stood in the hallway, paralyzed by the implications of what I was hearing. If I confronted him directly, would he simply become more careful, more subtle in his manipulation? Would he turn our daughter against me, convince her that I was being paranoid or cruel during her mother's final months? Most terrifying of all, if he was capable of psychological warfare against a dying woman, what else might he be capable of if he felt cornered? So I made a choice that haunts me still. I decided to gather evidence before I acted. I told myself I was being strategic, that I needed proof before I could effectively stop what was happening. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing my daughter's love, scared of making my wife's final months even more painful, scared of discovering just how deep this betrayal went. While I was being careful and strategic and scared, my wife signed documents that transferred $80,000 of her assets into accounts she didn't control, revised her will to minimize my inheritance, and changed the beneficiary on her life insurance policy to include provisions that would benefit a man who was terrorizing her in her own home. 3 weeks before she died, Leah stopped asking me about our financial assets. She stopped crying in the middle of the night. She stopped mentioning Skylar's visits or our daughter's mysterious need for money. At first, I thought this meant the pressure had stopped, that whatever crisis had been driving these strange financial decisions had been resolved. Now I understand what really happened. My wife gave up fighting because she realized no one was coming to rescue her. She signed whatever documents Skylar put in front of her because she was too tired, too sick, too isolated to resist anymore. The last coherent conversation we had was 3 days before she slipped into the final coma. She was lying in our bed, so thin I could see the outline of her bones beneath the pale skin, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks. "Stanley," she whispered, reaching for my hand with fingers that felt like paper. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I said, and I meant it with everything I had left. "Don't let him destroy our daughter. She doesn't know what he really is. When you find out the truth, and you will find out the truth, remember that she's a victim too." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I thought she was talking about the natural challenges any marriage faces, or perhaps some personality conflicts she had observed between Skylar and our daughter. Now I know she was trying to warn me that what he had done to her, he was also doing to the child we both loved more than life itself. My wife died knowing that she had been betrayed, stolen from, and psychologically tortured by someone our family had trusted. She died knowing that I had failed to protect her when she needed me most. But she also died knowing that I would eventually discover the full scope of what he had done, and she trusted me to find a way to save our daughter from the same fate. That trust is why I spent the 3 weeks after her funeral not grieving properly but investigating. That trust is why I hired private detectives instead of planning memorial services. That trust is why I documented every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, every piece of evidence that proved my wife's final months had been a nightmare, orchestrated by the man sitting across from me right now, acting like he has a right to control her legacy. The footsteps in the hallway are getting closer, and I can see the fear growing in Skylar's eyes as he begins to understand that his time is running out. My wife's trust is why I'm about to make sure he pays for every tear she cried, every night she lay awake in terror, every document she signed with hands that shook from more than illness. The door handle turns and everything is about to change. The door opens with a quiet click that somehow sounds thunderous in the absolute silence of the conference room. Detective Maria Santos enters first, her badge clearly visible on her navy blazer, followed by Detective James Wheeler and a third man I recognize as Agent Richardson from the district attorney's office. My daughter gasps, her hand flying to her mouth as she stares at the badges. Attorney Morrison drops his pen, and I can hear it rolling across the polished mahogany table in the sudden quiet. But my eyes are fixed on Skylar, watching his face cycle through confusion, realization, and finally a kind of calculating panic that tells me everything I need to know about who he really is. "Good afternoon," Detective Santos says, her voice professionally calm. "We're looking for Skylar Morrison Welsh. We have some questions regarding financial irregularities connected to several estate cases in this jurisdiction." The words hit the room like a physical force. Skylar's face has gone completely white, but he's still standing behind his chair, still trying to maintain some semblance of control. I can see his mind working, searching for an escape route that doesn't exist. "I think there's been some mistake," he says, and his voice is steady despite the fear I can see in his eyes. "I'm here for a private family meeting about my late mother-in-law's estate." Detective Wheeler steps forward, consulting a small notebook. "Skylar Morrison Welsh, age 35, married to Jennifer Holloway Welsh, son-in-law to Stanley and the late Leah Holloway?" "Yes, but I don't understand what this has to do with—" "Mr. Welsh," Detective Santos interrupts gently, "we'd like to ask you about your relationship with Eleanor Hartwick, Martha Donovan, and Ruth Chen. Do those names sound familiar?" I watch Skylar's face carefully, and I see the exact moment when he realizes how much trouble he's in. There's a tiny muscle that starts twitching near his left eye, and his hands grip the back of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turn white. "I've never heard those names before," he says, but his voice has lost some of its smoothness. My daughter is looking back and forth between her husband and the detectives, like she's watching a car accident happen in slow motion. "What is this about?" she asks, and her voice sounds very small in the large room. Detective Santos turns to address her directly, and her expression softens with what I recognize as professional sympathy. "Mrs. Welsh, we're investigating a pattern of financial exploitation targeting elderly women and their families. Your husband's name has come up in connection with several cases." "That's impossible," my daughter says immediately, reaching for Skylar's hand. But I notice that he doesn't reach back, doesn't provide the reassuring squeeze or supportive gesture that a loving husband would offer. Instead, he's focused entirely on the detectives, his mind clearly working on damage control rather than comforting his wife. Agent Richardson opens a leather portfolio and pulls out a thick stack of documents. "Mr. Welsh, we have records showing that over the past 5 years you've had intimate relationships with at least 6 different women, all of whom lost significant amounts of money during or shortly after your involvement in their lives." "This is outrageous," Schuyler says, but I can hear the desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm a married man. I love my wife. This is obviously some kind of mistaken identity situation." Detective Wheeler pulls out his phone and shows Schuyler the screen. "This is a photograph taken 3 months ago at the Riverside Cafe downtown. Would you care to explain why you're having lunch with Martha Donovan while holding her hand across the table?" I can't see the photograph from where I'm sitting, but I can see my daughter's face as she stares at the phone screen. The color drains from her cheeks and she takes an involuntary step backward as if the image physically pushed her. "Jenny," Schuyler starts, reaching for her now, but she jerks away from his touch. "Who is Martha Donovan?" she asks, and her voice is barely a whisper. Detective Santos answers gently. "She's a 72-year-old widow who lost her husband 18 months ago. According to her family, she met your husband at a grief support group and believed she was in a committed romantic relationship with him. During their 6-month relationship, she gave him access to her financial accounts and lost approximately $90,000. The numbers hit the room like individual blows. $90,000, 6 months, grief support group. Each detail paints a picture so ugly and predatory that I feel sick to my stomach. My daughter is staring at Schuyler with an expression I've never seen before. It's not anger yet. It's deeper than that. It's the look of someone watching their entire understanding of reality crumble in real time. "Schuyler," she says, and his name sounds different coming from her mouth now. "Tell them this is wrong. Tell them you've never met these women." But Schuyler isn't looking at his wife anymore. He's focused on Agent Richardson, who has pulled out another set of documents. We also have bank records showing transfers from Leah Holloway's accounts to a secondary account, registered under the name Scott Morrison. Agent Richardson continues. "The same name that appears on rental agreements for an apartment where you've been meeting Martha Donovan and Eleanor Hartwick." Scott Morrison. The false identity lands in my stomach like a stone. Not only was he stealing from my wife, but he was using a fake name to do it, creating an entire parallel life built on lies and theft. Attorney Morrison, the real Morrison, finally speaks up, his voice shaky with professional concern. "I think we should pause this meeting until Mr. Welsh can obtain legal representation." "That's his right," Detective Santos agrees. "But Mr. Welsh, we do need you to come with us to answer some questions. We have a warrant." She produces the legal document from her jacket, and I watch Schuyler's last hope of controlling this situation disappear. He takes the warrant with hands that are visibly trembling now, his eyes scanning the official language that spells out exactly how much the authorities already know. My daughter has sunk into one of the leather chairs, her face buried in her hands. I want to go to her, to offer comfort, but I know this isn't over yet. There are still revelations coming that will hurt even more than what she's already heard. "Before we go," Detective Wheeler says, consulting his notebook again, "Mr. Holloway, we understand you've been cooperating with our investigation. Is that correct?" Every eye in the room turns to me. Schuyler's expression shifts from panic to rage as he realizes what that means. "You," he says, and his voice is raw with fury. "You did this. You turned them against me." I meet his gaze steadily. "I protected my family the only way I could." "Stanley," my daughter says, lifting her head to stare at me. "What does he mean? What did you do?" I take a deep breath, knowing that what I'm about to tell her will change our relationship forever, but also knowing that the truth is the only thing that might save her. 3 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in your mother's accounts," I begin. "Money disappearing, documents being changed, your mother becoming increasingly frightened and withdrawn. When I realized what was happening, I contacted the authorities." "You've been investigating my husband for 3 months?" Her voice is rising, and I can hear the betrayal mixing with the shock. "While Mom was dying, you were spying on my family?" "I was protecting our family," I say quietly, "including you." Detective Santos steps forward diplomatically. "Mrs. Welsh, your father's cooperation has been invaluable in documenting a pattern of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Without his evidence, we might never have been able to connect your husband to the other victims." "Other victims?" The phrase hangs in the air like smoke. My daughter's husband isn't just a man who made some questionable financial decisions. He's a predator with a system, a method, multiple victims. Skylar is still staring at me with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," he says. "You think you're protecting her, but you're destroying her. She'll never forgive you for this." "Maybe not," I admit, "but she'll be alive and free to make that choice." Agent Richardson closes his portfolio and signals to the detectives. "Mr. Welsh, we need to go now." As they move toward Skylar, he makes one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. He turns to my daughter, and for a moment his expression shifts back to something that might look like love if you didn't know what I know about him. "Jenny, baby, listen. To me," he says urgently. "This is all a misunderstanding. These people are lying, manipulating evidence because your father turned them against me. You know me. You know I would never hurt you or your family." My daughter looks up at him, and for a terrible moment, I think she might believe him. I think she might choose the comfortable lie over the painful truth. But then Detective Santos speaks again, and her words cut through whatever spell Skylar was trying to weave. "Mrs. Welsh, among the evidence we've collected are recorded phone conversations between your husband and Martha Donovan, where he discusses his marriage to you as a business arrangement and refers to you as a necessary inconvenience until the inheritance clears." The words hit my daughter like a physical blow. I watch her face crumple, not with sadness, but with something deeper and more devastating. The complete destruction of everything she believed about the man she married and the life they built together. "No," she whispers. But it's not a denial of the evidence. It's a denial of the reality she's being forced to accept. Skylar tries one more time. "Jenny, please, don't." The word comes out sharp and final. "Don't say my name, don't touch me, don't look at me." Detective Wheeler takes Skylar's arm gently but firmly. "We need to go now, sir." As they lead him toward the door, Skylar looks back at the room he controlled just 20 minutes ago. His eyes find mine one last time, and I see something there that chills me more than his anger or his panic. I see the calculation of a man who isn't finished fighting yet. "This isn't over, Stanley," he says quietly, his voice carrying a promise that makes my skin crawl. "You have no idea what you've started." Then he's gone, and the room falls into a silence so complete. I can hear my daughter crying and the tick of the grandfather clock and my own heart hammering against my ribs. But I also hear something else in that silence. I hear the sound of truth finally being spoken, of secrets finally being exposed, of justice finally beginning to be served. My wife can rest now. Her tormentor is in custody. But as I look at my daughter's devastated face, I realize that the hardest part of this fight is just beginning. The silence after Skylar's arrest stretches for what feels like hours but is probably only minutes. My daughter, Jenny, sits motionless in the leather chair, staring at the space where her husband was standing moments before. Attorney Morrison is gathering papers with shaking hands, clearly overwhelmed by the revelation that his client meeting has turned into a crime scene. Detective Santos remains in the room, her presence both comforting and ominous. "Mrs. Welsh," Detective Santos says gently, pulling up a chair to sit beside my daughter. "I know this is overwhelming. Would you like us to explain what we've discovered about your husband's activities?" Jenny looks up slowly, and I can see she's gone into some kind of shock. Her face is pale but dry. She's moved beyond tears into that numb space where trauma lives. "How long?" she asks, and her voice sounds hollow. "How long has he been doing this?" Detective Santos exchanges a glance with Agent Richardson, who opens his portfolio again. "Based on our investigation, we believe the pattern started approximately 7 years ago. The first documented case we can prove involves a widow named Helen Carpenter in Phoenix." 7 years. I watch my daughter process this information. She and Skylar have been married for 3 years, which means he was already an active predator when they met. Their entire relationship was built on a foundation of ongoing criminal activity. "We believe," Agent Richardson continues carefully, that your husband targeted women who had recently lost spouses or were dealing with serious medical issues. He would establish relationships through support groups, volunteer organizations, or social events where vulnerable people might be seeking connection and comfort. Jenny's hands are clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles have turned white. "The grief support group," she whispers. "That's where we met. I was going through a difficult breakup, feeling lost, and he seemed so understanding, so caring." The pieces click together with horrible clarity. Even my daughter was a mark, chosen not for love, but for her potential value as a stepping stone to our family's assets. Detective Santos nods sympathetically. That appears to be his pattern. He's very skilled at identifying women who are emotionally vulnerable and financially stable. In your case, he likely saw an opportunity to access not just your resources, but your parents' estate as well. "Show her the files," I say quietly. I need Jenny to understand the full scope of what she married, not just the pieces that directly affected our family. Agent Richardson hesitates. "Mr. Holloway, this information is quite disturbing. Are you sure?" "She needs to know everything," I insist, meeting Jenny's eyes. "She deserves to know the truth about the man she trusted." Jenny takes a shaky breath and nods. "Yes, I want to know everything." Agent Richardson opens the portfolio fully and spreads several photographs and documents across the conference table. What I see makes my stomach turn, but I force myself to look because Jenny needs to see me facing this truth with her. Eleanor Hartwick, age 68. Agent Richardson begins, pointing to a photograph of a silver-haired woman with kind eyes. "She lost her husband in a car accident 2 years ago. She met your husband at a church social event where he introduced himself as Scott Morrison, a grief counselor." The photograph shows Eleanor smiling beside Skylar at what appears to be a restaurant. He has his arm around her shoulders and she's looking at him with unmistakable affection. Eleanor gave him access to her checking account to help with investment opportunities. Detective Santos continues. Over 6 months, she lost $47,000. When she began asking questions about the investments, he disappeared completely. Jenny stares at the photograph with a mixture of horror and recognition. "That's the smile," she says faintly. "That's the exact same smile he gave me when we first met." Agent Richardson places another photograph on the table. Ruth Chen, age 74. Widowed 8 months when she met your husband at a senior center volunteer event. He told her he was David Morris, a financial advisor helping elderly people protect their assets. This photograph shows Skylar helping an elderly Asian woman with grocery bags outside a supermarket. He looks attentive, helpful, trustworthy. Everything about his body language suggests a caring relationship with someone he genuinely values. Ruth lost $32,000 in fraudulent investment schemes, Detective Santos explains. She also signed over power of attorney for her medical decisions, which your husband used to access her prescription medications. "Prescription medications?" Jenny asks, and I can hear her voice getting tighter with each revelation. "Pain medications primarily," Agent Richardson explains. "We believe he was reselling them, but we also suspect he may have used them to incapacitate victims when he needed to access their financial documents or force signatures." The implication hits me like a physical blow. Those last weeks when Leah seemed confused, when she would drift off in the middle of conversations, when she signed documents she later couldn't remember, was that the cancer medication, or was it something else entirely? Did he? I start, then stop, not sure I want to hear the answer. Did he use drugs on my wife? Detective Santos meets my eyes with professional gentleness. "We're still investigating the specifics of Mrs. Holloway's case, but based on the pattern we've observed, it's possible." Jenny makes a sound that's somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Oh, God. Mom. What did he do to Mom?" Agent Richardson places a final photograph on the table, and this one makes my heart stop completely. It's Leah, sitting in our own living room. But she looks different than I remember her in those final months. Her eyes are unfocused, glassy, and she's holding a pen over a document I don't recognize. This photograph was found on your husband's phone, Detective Santos explains. Based on the metadata, it was taken 6 weeks before your mother's death. I stare at the image of my wife, seeing her not as the strong, loving woman I thought I was caring for, but as she actually was, a victim being systematically drugged and manipulated in her own home while I was trying to make her comfortable. Jenny reaches for the photograph with trembling fingers. She looks so scared, she whispers. Look at her eyes. She looks terrified. She's right. In the photograph, Leah's expression isn't the peaceful resignation of someone accepting their fate. It's the confused fear of someone who knows something terrible is happening but doesn't understand what or how to stop it. We believe your husband was documenting the signing of financial documents as insurance against later accusations, Agent Richardson explains. If anyone questioned the transfers or changes to her will, he could produce evidence that she signed voluntarily. But she wasn't signing voluntarily, I say, and my voice sounds strange to my own ears. She was drugged, threatened, terrorized. Detective Santos nods gravely. That's what we believe as well. The toxicology report from your wife's final hospital admission showed levels of sedatives that were inconsistent with her prescribed medications. The room starts to spin slightly, and I have to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. While I was bringing Leah water and adjusting her pillows and reading her favorite books, Skylar was poisoning her. While I was trying to make her final months peaceful and comfortable, he was making sure she was too confused and frightened to resist his theft. Jenny suddenly stands up so quickly that her chair tips backward. I need to see the recordings, she says urgently. The detective mentioned recordings of phone calls. I need to hear what he said about me. Detective Santos hesitates. Mrs. Welsh, I'm not sure that's advisable right now. You're processing a lot of traumatic information and— I need to hear it, Jenny interrupts, and there's something in her voice that reminds me of her mother when Leah made up her mind about something. I need to know exactly what he thought of me, what he said about our marriage. I need to know how stupid I was. You weren't stupid, I say firmly. You were in love with someone who was very skilled at lying. But Jenny shakes her head. No, Dad, I was stupid. There were signs, weren't there? Things I should have noticed. Agent Richardson pulls out a small digital recorder. Are you certain you want to hear this? Once you've heard his actual words, you can't unhear them. Jenny sits back down and folds her hands in her lap with forced composure. Play it. The recording quality is surprisingly clear. Skylar's voice fills the room, casual and confident, talking to someone I assume is Martha Donovan. The wife situation is temporary, he's saying, and hearing him refer to my daughter as the wife situation makes my hands clench into fists. She's useful for now because her family has assets I need access to, but she's not particularly bright, very trusting, very eager to please, easy to manage. Jenny's face goes completely still, but I can see her breathing getting faster. Skylar continues. The old man is suspicious, but the mother is dying and scared, so she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. Once that's handled and I have control of the estate assets, I can file for divorce and move on. Jennifer will probably be devastated, but she'll get over it. Women like her always do. The recording stops, and the silence that follows is deafening. Jenny is staring at the recorder like it might explode. Women like me, she repeats flatly, always get over it. There's another segment of recording, and Agent Richardson looks at me questioningly. I nod, knowing Jenny needs to hear everything. The best part, Skylar's voice continues, is that she actually thinks I love her. She's so desperate for validation that she interprets basic manipulation as romance. I bought her flowers twice, and she started planning our future together. It's almost pathetic. Jenny stands up abruptly and walks to the window, pressing her forehead against the glass. Her shoulders are shaking, but she's not making any sound. There's more, Detective Santos says quietly. Phone conversations where he discusses selling your mother's jewelry, plans to contest your father's ownership of the house, even strategies for convincing you to take out loans against your own assets. Enough, I say, moving to stand behind Jenny. She's heard enough for now. But Jenny turns around and there's something new in her expression. The shock and devastation are still there, but underneath them I can see anger beginning to build. "No," she says firmly. "I want to hear all of it, every word, every plan, every lie he told about my family and about me." She walks back to the table and sits down, her posture straighter now, more determined. "I loved him," she says, and her voice is steady despite the tears starting to fall again. "I defended him to you, Dad, when you tried to warn me. I chose him over my own family because I thought he loved me back." She looks at the photographs of the other women, studies their faces one by one. "How many others are there?" she asks. "We've identified 11 definite cases over 7 years," Agent Richardson answers. "Combined financial losses total approximately $423,000. $423,000. 11 women, 7 years of systematic theft and emotional destruction." "What happens now?" Jenny asks. Detective Santos closes the portfolio. "Your husband will be charged with multiple counts of elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy. With the evidence we have, particularly your father's documentation and the recorded conversations, the district attorney is confident about securing convictions." Jenny nods slowly, then looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. "Dad," she says quietly, "I need to apologize to you, and I need to know something." I wait, not sure what's coming. Did Mom know? At the end, did she know what was happening to her? I close my eyes, remembering Leah's final lucid conversation, her warning about not letting Skylar destroy our daughter. "Yes," I say honestly, "she knew. And her last words to me were about protecting you from him." Jenny starts to cry again, but these tears are different. They're not the helpless tears of someone whose world has collapsed. They're the cleansing tears of someone who finally understands the truth and is ready to fight back. "Then let's finish what Mom started," she says, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Let's make sure he never hurts anyone else's family ever again." The week following Skylar's arrest passes in a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and difficult conversations. Jenny has been staying in her childhood bedroom, the room with the faded purple walls and high school photos that seem to mock the sophisticated woman she thought she had become. She can't bear to go back to the apartment she shared with Skylar, can't face the bed where she slept beside a man who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone to her family's money. I find her on Friday morning sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of legal documents Detective Santos dropped off the previous evening. The morning light filtering through the familiar yellow curtains makes her look younger, more vulnerable, like the little girl who used to bring me drawings from school and beg for bedtime stories. "Dad," she says without looking up, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I pour myself coffee from the pot she's already made, something we've fallen into as a routine this week, sharing quiet mornings before the day's legal responsibilities take over. The familiar domestic rhythm feels both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of what our family was like before Skylar entered our lives. "Ask me anything," I say, settling into the chair across from her. She finally looks up, and I can see she's been crying again. Her eyes are red-rimmed but determined, and there's something in her expression that reminds me powerfully of her mother when Leah was working through a difficult decision. "When you first started suspecting what he was doing to Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you try to convince me to leave him before it got so bad?" The question I've been dreading for a week. I've asked myself the same thing dozens of times, lying awake in the bed I shared with Leah for 4 decades, wondering if I could have saved both of the women I love if I had been braver, smarter, more willing to risk Jenny's anger. Because I was scared, I admit. Scared that you wouldn't believe me, scared that he would turn you against me completely, scared that if I pushed too hard I might lose you forever. Jenny nods slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of one of the legal documents. "But mostly you were scared I would choose him over you." "Yes." She's quiet for a long moment, and I can hear the old house settling around us, the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of traffic starting to pick up as people head to work. "I would have," she says finally. "If you had told me 6 months ago that Skylar was stealing from Mom, manipulating her, hurting her, I would have defended him. I would have accused you of being jealous or controlling or unable to accept that I had found someone who loved me." The words hurt because they're true, but also because I can hear the self-recrimination in her voice, the way she's punishing herself for loving someone who didn't deserve it. "You can't blame yourself for trusting someone who was skilled at being trustworthy," I tell her. "Skylar fooled a lot of people, Jenny. Smart people, careful people. That's what made him so dangerous." She laughs, but there's no humor in it. "Smart people? Dad, I missed so many signs. The way he always wanted to handle our finances, how he knew exactly what to say when I was upset about something, how he seemed to understand my insecurities better than I understood them myself." She picks up one of the documents, a transcript of another recorded phone conversation between Skylar and an unknown woman. I've read it already, and I know what she's seeing. "He called me emotionally damaged goods in this one," she says, her voice carefully controlled. "Said I was so desperate for male approval that I would believe anything as long as it was delivered with flowers and compliments." I reach across the table and cover her hand with mine. "Jenny, stop reading those." "No." She pulls her hand away gently but firmly. "I need to read all of them. I need to understand exactly how he saw me, exactly what he thought of our marriage. Because if I don't understand how completely I was fooled, I might be fooled again by someone else." She's probably right, but watching her process the cruelty of Skylar's recorded words is almost unbearable. Every transcript, every piece of evidence, every revelation chips away at her sense of self, her confidence in her own judgment. "There's something else," she says, pulling out a folder I haven't seen before. "Detective Santos gave me this yesterday. She said you should probably see it too." I take the folder reluctantly. Inside are photographs and documents related to something called the Inheritance Project, apparently Skylar's code name for his systematic targeting of families dealing with end-of-life issues. The first photograph shows a whiteboard covered in Skylar's handwriting. It's laid out like a business plan, complete with target demographics, timeline projections, and financial goals. At the top, in bold letters, it says, Phase 3, Estate Transition and Asset Recovery. Below that are detailed notes about our family. Leah's medical condition, estimated timeline for her death, projected value of our assets, and strategies for maintaining subject compliance during documentation process. "Subject compliance," I read aloud, feeling sick. "That's what he called Mom," Jenny says flatly, "a subject who needed to maintain compliance." There are other notes, too. Analysis of my personality and potential reactions, assessment of Jenny's emotional vulnerabilities, and how to exploit them, even backup plans in case I became problematic before the estate transfer was complete. But the worst part is a series of photographs showing Skylar with the other women, Eleanor, Martha, Ruth, and others I don't recognize. In every photo, he's using the same gestures, the same expressions, the same calculated charm that I watched him use on my daughter and my dying wife. "It's like he had a script," Jenny says, studying the images. "Look at this one with Eleanor. He's holding her hand exactly the same way he held mine on our first date. Same smile, same tilt of his head. Even his body language is identical." She's right. Skylar's interactions with his victims follow a clear pattern, refined through years of practice. Every romantic gesture, every supportive comment, every moment of apparent intimacy was calculated for maximum emotional impact. "Jenny?" I start, but she interrupts me. "There's more. Detective Santos found his laptop." She opens another folder, this one containing printed emails and digital files. The subject lines alone make my stomach turn. Leah H., Final Documentation Schedule. Subject J., Emotional Manipulation Strategies, Asset Recovery Timeline, Phoenix to Texas. "He kept records of everything," Jenny says, her voice getting tighter with each revelation. "Every conversation we had, every time I cried or got upset or needed comfort, He wrote it all down and analyzed it for weaknesses he could exploit later. One email particularly catches my attention. It's sent to an address I don't recognize, dated just 2 weeks before Leah's death. Subject: L is becoming increasingly resistant to documentation changes, it reads. May need to increase sedation schedule and isolate from Stanley's influence. Subject: J remains compliant but requires careful management, suggesting increased attention and romantic gestures to maintain emotional dependency. Subject: Mel. Subject: J. My wife and daughter, reduced to clinical observations in a predator's research notes. Jenny is reading over my shoulder, and I feel her whole body tense as she processes the words. Increased sedation schedule, she repeats quietly. He was drugging Mom more when she started to resist signing papers. Jenny, you don't need to. And increased romantic gestures for me, she continues, her voice getting stronger with anger. I remember that week. He brought me flowers 3 times, took me to dinner at that expensive restaurant, told me he was lucky to have found someone who understood him so completely. She starts to laugh, but it's the kind of laughter that borders on hysteria. I thought he was just being extra affectionate because he knew I was worried about Mom. I thought he was being supportive during a difficult time, but he was just following his playbook for keeping the mark compliant while he murdered my mother. Murdered? I look at her sharply. Jenny pulls out the final document in the folder, a toxicology report I haven't seen before. Detective Santos had Mom's tissue samples retested with more sophisticated equipment. They found traces of a paralytic agent that's not used in any standard cancer treatments. The words swim on the page as I try to process what I'm reading. Paralytic agent. Not just sedatives to make Leah confused and compliant, but something that would have made her physically unable to resist, unable to call for help, unable to fight back. He didn't just steal from her, Jenny says, and her voice is completely steady now, cold with a fury I've never heard from her before. He tortured her. In those final weeks when she seemed so weak, so tired, when we thought it was just the cancer taking her strength, he was poisoning her. I set the report down with hands that are shaking so badly I can barely hold the paper. All those nights when I sat beside Leah's bed, holding her hand, while she drifted in and out of consciousness, I thought I was helping her find peace. I never suspected that her apparent calm was actually chemical paralysis induced by the man our daughter trusted. There's one more thing, Jenny says, and her voice has gone very quiet. Detective Santos thinks Mom might have been trying to leave me a message. She hands me a photograph of Leah's bedside table, taken by the crime scene team after they processed our house. Among the usual items, water glass, tissues, medication bottles, there's a small piece of paper with something written on it in Leah's shaky handwriting. Can you read what it says? Jenny asks. I've been staring at it for an hour, but her handwriting was so weak toward the end. I hold the photograph closer to the light, squinting at the faint pencil marks. It takes me several tries, but finally the words become clear. Jenny. Trust Dad, SM Not Who, Love You, SM, Scott Morrison. The false name Skylar used with his other victims. Even in her final days, drugged and terrified, Leah was trying to warn our daughter about the man who was destroying our family. Jenny takes the photograph back and stares at it for a long time. When she finally looks up, there are tears on her face, but her expression is resolute. I have to testify, she says. Not just about the financial stuff, but about everything. The manipulation, the emotional abuse, the way he isolated me from you and Mom. I have to make sure the jury understands that what he did wasn't just theft. It was torture. Jenny, you don't have to put yourself through that. There's enough evidence to convict him without— Yes, I do. She stands up and walks to the window, looking out at the garden where Leah used to grow tomatoes every summer. I have to testify because there are going to be other women, other families. If he gets out in 5 or 10 years because his sentence was too light, he's going to find new victims. She turns back to face me, and for the first time since Skylar's arrest, she looks like herself again, strong, determined, clear about what needs to be done. But more than that, I have to testify for Mom. She spent her last months trying to protect me from him, trying to warn me even when she was too drugged to form complete sentences. The least I can do is tell the truth about what he did to her. I stand up and walk to her, and for the first time in weeks, she doesn't pull away when I put my arms around her. Your mother would be proud of you, I tell her. I hope so, she says quietly, because I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone else the way he hurt our family. As I hold my daughter, I can feel some of the tension that's been living in my chest for months finally starting to ease. Skylar took so much from us. Leah's peace in her final days, our family's trust, Jenny's confidence in her own judgment. But he didn't take everything. He didn't take our love for each other, and he didn't take our determination to seek justice for the woman who died trying to protect us. Tomorrow, Jenny will give her statement to the district attorney. She'll tell them about the manipulation, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her ability to trust her own instincts. She'll help them understand that Skylar's crimes went far beyond simple theft. And when the trial begins, she'll look him in the eye and tell the world exactly what kind of monster he really is. For Leah, for the other victims, and for the families he'll never get the chance to destroy. Justice is coming, and this time, we're ready to fight. 18 months later, I'm standing in the lobby of the courthouse where everything began. But this time, I'm not here for depositions or evidence reviews. Today is sentencing day, and after a trial that lasted 6 weeks and exposed every detail of Skylar's 7-year crime spree, the judge is finally going to decide how long he'll spend in prison. Jenny is beside me, wearing the navy blue dress she chose specifically because it was Leah's favorite color. She looks different than she did during those dark days after Skylar's arrest, stronger, more confident, but also more careful about who she trusts. The trial was brutal for her, especially when she had to testify about the manipulation and emotional abuse. But it was also healing in ways neither of us expected. "Are you ready for this?" she asks, adjusting the silver pendant she's wearing, a piece of Leah's jewelry that we recovered after the court ordered the return of all stolen property. "I've been ready for 18 months, I tell her. Through the courtroom windows, I can see some of the other victims and their families gathering. Eleanor Hartwick's son drove in from Dallas to be here. Martha Donovan's daughter flew in from Seattle. Ruth Chen's niece came from Austin. Not all of Skylar's victims are still alive to see justice done. 2 of the elderly women he targeted died during the investigation, their health never recovering from the stress of what he put them through, but their families are here to represent them. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who treated this case like the serious crime it was, rather than a simple financial dispute. During the trial, she methodically presented evidence of 11 separate victims, $423,000 in documented theft, and what she called a pattern of predatory behavior that targeted the most vulnerable members of our community. But the charges that carried the heaviest penalties weren't for the money Skylar stole. They were for what he did to Leah. The toxicology reports, the photographs of her drugged and confused, the evidence that he had been systematically poisoning her to force compliance with his document changes. These elevated his crimes from fraud to something much more serious. Elder abuse with bodily injury, assault, conspiracy, and in Texas, the illegal administration of controlled substances to a person over 65 is a first-degree felony that can carry a life sentence. Jenny's testimony was the most powerful moment of the entire trial. She stood at the witness stand for 3 hours, calmly detailing how Skylar had isolated her from our family, manipulated her emotions, and used her love for him as a weapon against her own mother. She described the systematic way he had trained her to distrust her own instincts and defer to his judgment about everything from finances to family relationships. But the moment that broke the courtroom's composure was when she read Leah's final note aloud. "Jenny, trust Dad, SM not who, love you." I watched the jury's faces as they processed the image of a dying woman using her last coherent moments to try to warn her daughter about the man who was torturing her. 3 jurors were openly crying by the time Jenny finished her testimony, and I could see the anger building in their expressions as they looked at Skylar sitting at the defense table. His lawyer, an expensive criminal attorney his family somehow managed to hire, tried to argue that Schuyler was a man who had made mistakes but didn't deserve to have his life destroyed. He claimed the prosecution was exaggerating the scope of the crimes, that the victims were willing participants who later regretted their decisions, that Leah's condition was purely medical and not the result of any wrongdoing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversations where Schuyler laughed about his victims' trust, the detailed business plans for exploiting grieving families, the laptop full of psychological profiles and manipulation strategies, the toxicology reports showing drugs that had no legitimate medical purpose. Most damning of all were the photographs Detective Santos found on Schuyler's phone, images of his victims in various states of confusion and distress, apparently taken as trophies or documentation of his control over them. The photograph of Leah, signing documents while clearly incapacitated, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Now, as we wait for the judge to announce the sentence, I'm thinking about everything that's changed since that awful day in the lawyer's office when Schuyler tried to convince everyone that I didn't belong at my own wife's estate meeting. The house is still ours. All of Schuyler's fraudulent document changes were reversed by the court, and Leah's true will was restored. But more than that, Jenny and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than the careful politeness that had developed during her marriage. We have dinner together every Sunday, a tradition we started during the investigation when we both needed the comfort of family routine. We talk about Leah openly now, sharing memories and stories without the shadow of Schuyler's manipulation between us. Jenny has started seeing a therapist who specializes in helping victims of psychological abuse, and she's slowly learning to trust her own judgment again. She's also started dating again, something that terrified both of us at first. But she's approached it differently now, more cautious, more aware of red flags, more willing to include me in her life instead of compartmentalizing her relationships. The man she's been seeing for the past 3 months is a high school teacher named David, who seems genuinely kind and has no problem with the fact that Jenny wants to take things very slowly. He actually asked me about you, she told me after their 4th date. Oh, he wanted to know if it would be okay to meet you because he said he didn't want to be with someone who wasn't close to their family. Can you imagine Schuyler ever saying something like that? I couldn't, of course. Schuyler had worked systematically to isolate Jenny from me, to make her feel like she had to choose between her husband and her father. David, apparently, sees our relationship as something healthy that he wants to be part of, rather than something threatening that he needs to destroy. The courtroom doors open and people start filing in for the sentencing hearing. I see Detective Santos and Agent Richardson taking seats in the gallery, along with several other law enforcement officers who worked on the case. The victims' families gather in the front rows, some of them holding photographs of the women who died before they could see justice done. Judge Patricia Hawkins enters, and we all stand. She's been firm but fair throughout the trial, allowing the prosecution to present their evidence while ensuring Schuyler received proper legal representation. But I could see her growing anger as the scope of his crimes became clear, particularly when the evidence about Leah's poisoning was presented. Schuyler is brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled. He looks different than he did during his marriage to Jenny, thinner, paler, with none of the confident charm that he used to manipulate his victims. His expensive suits have been replaced with prison clothes, and his carefully styled hair has grown out into an unkempt mess. When he sees Jenny and me in the gallery, his expression doesn't change. No remorse, no shame, no acknowledgement of the pain he caused. Just the cold calculation of a predator who got caught. Judge Hawkins reviews the case file briefly, then looks up at the courtroom. Mr. Welsh, she begins, you have been convicted of 11 counts of financial elder abuse, 6 counts of assault, conspiracy, fraud, and the illegal administration of controlled substances resulting in bodily injury. The prosecution has recommended a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. A murmur runs through the courtroom. Life without parole means Schuyler will die in prison, never getting another chance to hurt vulnerable families. The defense has asked for leniency, citing your lack of prior convictions and claiming that your actions were motivated by financial desperation rather than malicious intent. However, the evidence presented during this trial paints a different picture entirely. Judge Hawkins pauses, looking directly at Schuyler. What you did to these victims was not the result of desperation or poor judgment. It was the systematic, calculated exploitation of people who trusted you during the most vulnerable periods of their lives. You targeted widows, cancer patients, and grieving families because you knew they would be less likely to question your motives or resist your manipulation. She picks up a photograph from her desk. I can't see what it is from where I'm sitting, but based on Schuyler's reaction, I suspect it's the image of Leah signing documents while drugged. Most disturbing of all is what you did to Leah Holloway, a woman who welcomed you into her family and treated you as a son. You poisoned her, terrorized her, and forced her to sign away her life savings while she was dying of cancer. You turned her final months, which should have been filled with peace and family love, into a nightmare of fear and confusion. Jenny reaches for my hand, and I can feel her trembling slightly. The court finds that your crimes represent a level of cruelty and predatory behavior that demands the maximum penalty under the law. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years for the assault charges. Life plus 25 years. Schuyler will never get out. He'll never have another chance to target vulnerable families or manipulate women who trust him. As the judge finishes reading the sentence, I feel something I haven't experienced in almost 2 years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, because nothing can bring Leah back or undo the trauma Schuyler inflicted on our family. But peace, knowing that justice has been served and that he'll never hurt anyone else. The hearing ends and people begin filing out of the courtroom. Several of the victims' families approach Jenny and me to shake hands and offer thanks for our role in the investigation. Eleanor Hartwick's son tells us that his mother has started sleeping through the night again now that she knows Schuyler is in prison. Ruth Chen's niece says her aunt has begun trusting people again, something they weren't sure would ever happen. Outside the courthouse, Detective Santos stops to talk with us one final time. I wanted you to know, she says, that this case has changed how our department handles elder abuse investigations. We're implementing new protocols for recognizing psychological manipulation and financial exploitation, and we're training officers to look for the kind of patterns Mr. Welsh used. Good, Jenny says firmly. Maybe it will help other families avoid what we went through. As we walk to our cars, Jenny stops suddenly and turns to face me. Dad, there's something I want to do with the money. What money? The restitution. The court ordered Schuyler to pay back everything he stole, plus penalties. It's going to be almost $600,000 once all his assets are liquidated. I hadn't really thought about the money. It seemed less important than getting justice for Leah and making sure Schuyler couldn't hurt anyone else. I want to start a foundation, Jenny continues. Something that helps families recognize and report elder abuse before it gets as bad as what happened to Mom. We could fund training programs for healthcare workers, support groups for victims, maybe even hire investigators to help families who suspect their elderly relatives are being exploited. The idea takes my breath away. Not just because it's a beautiful way to honor Leah's memory, but because it shows how completely Jenny has healed from Schuyler's manipulation. Instead of being afraid of trusting people or getting involved in difficult situations, she wants to use her experience to help other families. We could call it the Leah Holloway Foundation, she says. What do you think? I think about my wife, about her strength and her love for our family, about how she spent her final coherent moments trying to warn Jenny about the man who was hurting her. I think about how proud she would be to know that her daughter turned her pain into something that could protect other families. I think your mother would love that, I tell Jenny. And I think it's exactly what she would have wanted us to do with this experience. 6 months later, the Leah Holloway Foundation opens its doors in a small office downtown. Jenny runs it full-time, using her experience as Schuyler's victim to help other families recognize the warning signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I volunteer there twice a week, talking to adult children who are worried about their elderly parents but don't know how to investigate their suspicions. The Foundation has already helped expose 3 other cases of elder abuse in our community, and we're working with law enforcement agencies in 4 different states to train officers in recognizing psychological manipulation tactics. But perhaps most importantly, the Foundation has given both Jenny and me a sense of purpose that we lost when Leah died. Instead of just surviving our grief and trauma, we're using it to make a difference in other people's lives. On quiet Sunday afternoons, when Jenny and I have dinner together in the house where Leah and I raised our family, we sometimes talk about how different our lives would be if Skylar had succeeded in his plan. If I hadn't found the courage to investigate his activities, if I hadn't cooperated with law enforcement, if Jenny hadn't found the strength to testify against him, we would still be grieving Leah's death, but we would also be living with the knowledge that her killer had gotten away with his crimes and was probably targeting other families. Jenny would still be married to a man who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone to wealth, isolated from her family and convinced that her own judgment couldn't be trusted. Instead, we have justice. We have each other. And we have the knowledge that Leah's death, though it can never be undone, has meaning beyond the tragedy of losing her. She died trying to protect our family, and in the end, she succeeded. Skylar took her life, but he didn't take her legacy. Every family the Foundation helps, every case of elder abuse we expose, every vulnerable person we protect. It's all part of Leah's continuing fight against the predators who target the people we love, and that's a legacy worth living for.